Hi, this is Casper Eastman here. I This is my first video that I've ever done uh, dealing with the issue of female nature, MGTOW, etc., etc. And it's a bit of a response. I wouldn't say it's a response. It's just adding on to some things that YouTuber M Kraft stated about his experience with his Russian wife. Um, and I wanted to add a little bit of information, maybe give some of you guys some deeper insights, just to give you a little bit of information about myself. I'm a U.S. citizen, but I've been living in uh, Russia for almost 10 years, and I've been living in the former Soviet Union if you combine my time here in Russia and one other former Soviet republic, it's going on about 11 years. So, I've experimented with the dating scene here. I have a lot of experience and can say a lot of things about women here compared to women in the West. Naturally, female nature is female nature. I have been listening and watching a lot of MGTOW content over the last year, particularly, and I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the things that I've seen and heard, they seem to comport with reality. I think there is something. There's such thing as female nature, and it certainly does influence how they interact with men. And while cultures influence people differently and shape people differently, nevertheless, female nature, if we're going to call it that, most certainly it causes women to act a certain way that transcends cultures. I think the thing I'd like to add regarding some of the things that M Kraft said, he met someone on the internet, and for you guys that are going to experiment with this, I mean, first off, I wouldn't advise it, especially for those of you who are going your own way or taking the red pill. Obviously, this shouldn't be something that you should entertain. You're not going to find, you're most likely not going to find an Walt this way. Though I have to say, if I were, there's certainly some characteristics about women in this part of the world that are somewhat redeemable compared to a lot of Western women, and because of their feminism has not influenced the culture over here nearly to the degree that it has in the West. I think it's sometime in another video I'll talk a little bit more about my observations regarding that and the general sort of reaction and attitude towards feminism here among the population, both male and female, because there's some really interesting things going on in that sense. But what I will say is this: for you guys that, if you're entertaining trying to meet, you guys that haven't quite taken the red pill, and you're entertaining trying to meet some women, especially from this part of the world, because it is a fact that women from this part of the world are far more traditional. They generally, by and large, tend to be far more open to, I guess you can say, playing the more traditional role of being the mother, the homekeeper, the one that takes care of the house, sort of takes care of the husband while the husband goes off to work. I know there are a lot of guys like that. And women over here are generally more open to that kind of arrangement. In fact, even career women, even women that are more independent, by and large, you ask them, and keep in mind, I live in Moscow. I'll go ahead and give you that much information about myself, which is probably the most, I guess you could say, westernized city in the country. But even here, if you ask the average woman who is career-minded, most of them will say 9 times out of 10 that if they had it their way, they would prefer to be a homekeeper, raising children while the husband's out working. Be that as it may, here's the advice that I would give to you, those guys who are entertaining trying to meet women from this part of the world. Judging by some of the things that M Kraft said in his video, it sounds to me like the woman he was married to from here was not a Muscovite woman. She most likely was from a provincial part of the country. And all the things he said about women have a sort of a misconception about America, sort of based on stereotypes from 20 years ago, absolutely right. He nailed it. 100%. It's absolutely true. But the only thing I'll add to that is that tends to be true among women who are from provincial cities. Most Muscovite girls, or a lot of Muscovite girls, I should say, are very well traveled. A lot of them, in fact, many people here in general and from this particular city are much better traveled than the average American. Uh, One, because you can generate the income to afford to travel, even with the difficult economic situation of the weak currency at the moment. And two, Russia's next to Europe. I mean, you can jump on a plane from here and be in, Spain in 4 hours, or Central Europe in 2.5, London in 4, etc. So people here take advantage of that who have the means, and so women here are generally more exposed to what life is like outside of the country, and so they're not sort of evaluating the West in general and the United States in particular based on stereotypes from 20 years ago. So that's one thing to take into consideration. Two, from my experience, the only kind of women that are going online to try to meet a man to leave and to go west and to find themselves, a more responsible man. That's what they generally will say when they're looking for a Western man. They're women from these provincial areas, and when the provincial parts of this country they're not first world. That's about the only thing I'll have to say that M Kraft said that I would have to disagree with a little bit. Moscow, St. Petersburg, maybe one or two other cities in this country would be more or less first world. Most of the country, most of this part of the world is what I would call second world. You've got small towns and villages that still, lots of small towns and villages, mainly villages in this part of the world, that in some cases still don't have indoor plumbing. So it's still very underdeveloped in large parts of the country here, and people who live in provincial areas, especially with the weak currency right now, are only making a couple $100s a month. So you're dealing with women from a part of the country that's quite different from what I would call the first world areas of the country. And naturally, when you're in that kind of situation, that's in my observation where the hypergamy really starts kicking in. And they're looking for guys that can get them into better situations. And then, of course, like what seemed to be the case in M Kraft, then they try to monkey branch. And the story he told, I ran into that back in America before I came to this part of the world. And I've seen it here, and honestly speaking, I've experienced it on a couple of occasions. I dated 2 women several years ago, so it had been my first couple of years in the city, kind of experimenting more with the dating scene. The 2 women that I guess you could say showed the most interest in me, and I would say threw themselves at me, were 2 women from provincial parts of the country. One particular she was drop dead gorgeous. She was easily a 9, and easily the most physically attractive woman I've ever dated in my life. When my family found out I was dating her, they were ecstatic. But it didn't take me long to figure out, and this was before I guess you could say I kind of took the red pill. Well, at least I didn't understand hypergamy. I guess I kind of subconsciously understood what was going on, but I couldn't put a definition on it. I cut her off as soon as I understood that the main thing that was attractive for her about myself was my passport. She was hoping that I would eventually go back to the States and that she would have the opportunity to go back to the States. So you need to be wary of that. And the one particular girl that I've just mentioned that was very attractive, she was very, very hypergamous. And just to give you a little bit of a backstory, after I cut her off and sent her basically back to where she's from, she then chose the second best option, I guess. It's very common among women from provincial parts of the former Soviet Union. She found herself a rich Turk. And last I heard was living in Turkey with him, and he's the guy that inherited a bunch of money, and she's, I guess, living well. But there you go, hypergamy. So you guys that are trying to meet women from this part of the world, you need to be cognizant of the fact that most of those kind of women who are actually going into those sites trying to find guys in the West are those kind of girls. They're girls from provincial cities in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Russia, and they're hypergamous, And don't let them deceive you with their physical attractiveness, because the women here are really, really good looking. They take much better care of themselves, and that can be very appealing for a guy. And they can lure you in if you're not on your guard, and then they can come to your country. And for example, the U.S., Britain, wherever, somewhere west. And as soon as they get established, they can monkey branch. And by the way, guys, I've heard of cases where they'll come and they'll get influenced by the local women, and they'll actually be encouraged to dump you. You know, the whole "you go girl" sort of mentality and attitude will be will influence them, and the women that they're associating with in the U.S. will, tell them, hey, you can do better. You can leave. You don't like how he's treating you, leave. And they can run away with all the cash and prizes, with all the laws that favor women in a divorce context, depending on which state you're in. So you guys need to be really, really careful. You guys got to be really, really careful. The only thing I can say, I don't even know if I want to even give advice going in terms of if you want to find somebody over here. Generally speaking, if you would ever consider wanting to try to get with a woman in this part of the world, it's better to find them from one of these first world cities like Petersburg and Moscow. In fact, it's very likely that if that happens, they won't want to go west, because for the most part, they can have the lifestyle here in these cities that they could get back in the U.S. And if they have real estate to some extent, they may even be better. They may even have a higher standard of living. But that's for you to decide. I don't know that I can't say that I've gone 100% red pill personally. I think I consider myself at this point a purple pillar. But as the days go by and as I get closer to 40, I'm in my mid 30s now. That shade of purple becomes more and more, has more of a red hue to it. So I hope this helps out. I hope M Kraft doesn't take this as any kind of, I'm not, like I said, criticizing him. I'm actually kind of, I think, adding just a little bit more insight into some of the things that he said. By and large, I think his video was spot on. And, take heed to what he and I are both saying regarding women from this part of the world. Sorry, I hope this was my first video producing this kind of content. It's unscripted, obviously, so I'm kind of rambling. If you have any questions about this part of the world in general, this is kind of something I want to start doing. If you have questions about living in this part of the world in general, and specifically about the dynamics between men and women, differences between men and women over here, and questions about women, how they act, etc., feel free to either send me a personal message or leave a question down in the comments section of the video, and I'll be happy to try to generate some content based on the questions that you ask. All right, guys, have a good day. Take care.